LaRocca, actually, he 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 um, he lived in over Delancey Street or something like Essex Street, I remember, and he was my first big mentor. I'm trying to get this meeting is being streamed. Oh, just see it, got it. Okay, okay.
So, did you was your family like were your parents educators? Somebody told me that you had.
Yeah,
Uh,
they were in the Board of Ed, New York Board of Ed. They were principals and assistant principals and that stuff. But they were in, and my brother was a teacher, so was education was big in our home.
right. So that's where, as some if you might not know that, but Dave was really an innovator in jazz education as far as masterclass lecturing and creating a whole bunch of books, very useful books about all kinds of things, and including psychological aspects of playing, not just the technical things. So, Dave, I was told that you came from a family of educators, so you
Yes.
came by that naturally. Now, the musical part of you was how musical was the family?
Not nothing particular, but they loved my I remember my father coming in me playing Beautiful Dreamer. Beautiful he said, "Oh, I love that." And my mother would go to the piano. She knew and she played it, Breeze and I. Da, da,
Oh,
da, da,
sure.
da. So
You
that was the extent of you know,
no longer care. Lacuna.
yeah,
Ernesto Lacuna. That's right.
and so but in Jewish homes, as I'm sure you identify with, you had to do something, and it was not the great distractions we have now. And every house had a piano or a guitar, more or less. So
Yeah, piano was big.
I can't say I was forced to, but I was coerced into taking piano lessons and realizing that I loved Elvis Presley. That was my first idol.
Me too.
Oh, really? Oh,
You go
great.
one for the money, two for the show.
Oh,
I
yeah.
used to,
And
yeah.
uh,
Elvis Presley, good.
the lessons were like, just cursory, just getting it down. But I started to take part in like the school thing, being a band and big band and
By
combo.
playing, now you were playing piano or guitar or what were you
I was
playing?
playing. I loved the saxophone from early rock and roll. That was my mo. And when I started taking lessons, it was piano. Piano was rudimentary, but it was very, very good. He taught me to transpose. I didn't know what that was. I said, why are we playing one key and looking at another one? But I mean, the pivotal thing that happened to me at 15 years old was seeing Coltrane and witnessing that whole thing, which is a whole scene in itself to talk about if you like.
So
But
that was the epiphany. I remember you said you heard Coltrane with Elvin at that point. Was Elvin on drums when you heard
yeah,
Coltrane?
yes, but Eric Dolphy was there for that first Saturday when I went in Birdland. Eric Dolphy was in the group, so that dates it into 60, 61, something like that, 62. That. In fact, they just released this live at the what do you call it, Village Gate.
Vanguard. Oh, Village Gate, yeah.
And you can hear Elvin really clearly. Sounds like somebody put a microphone on top of the drums.
Well, he sounded like that anyway sometimes.
Anyway, exactly. So that was the basic way I got introduced into music. And then, of course, in high school, there were ample opportunities to be the conductor of the sing band and then jazz band and all. We had it was Lafayette High School, and it was a humongous school with 6,000 students, which was unusual in the 50s, 60s. And so they had a pretty good music program. And you could find 600 students were involved in the music
And
program.
you had played. That's where you started to play the saxophone.
Right. I know, as my mother said, she could. I failed to mention this. She after when I started taking lessons, piano lessons. I mean, it was cool. It was Andalusia and spinning song and some Bach and some minuet and G. I don't know. And I said, I like this, but I really don't want to do it. She said, you take 2 years, and then you can take the instrument of your choice. And it was a deal. It was a deal. So by about 12, 13 years old, I played at my bar mitzvah. I played saxophone with the band.
Ah,
So that dates it to like when I'm 13 years old.
right.
And But the pivotal
You
event,
started earlier, so you started saxophone at about 11 or so.
yeah, 11, 12, and then was then that became that, and that was also it was a distinction. I had polio, and
I was going to get into that. Yeah.
like those who had it know that there are some, depending on what the word, the energy level. There's some leftover stuff, so you compensate for that, as I did because I was a definite A personality. At so 12 years old, I was very aggressive, very pretty on top of the ball and stuff like that.
Hmm. In
So
fact, a couple of people I know who have had polio could be described as what people might say overachievers.
yes,
I've always wondered that with polio people, that if it had to do partly with that and partly with perhaps being a source of ridicule to some students. I mean, kids can be very cruel and everything. I wondered about that. Did you have to, what was the social life, social scene like having polio as a kid? If you don't mind talking about that for a minute.
well, it was it added more to what I was doing. That's my point. In other words, it ended up that I played a couple of instruments by the time I was 14. Uh, went to see John Coltrane at 15 years old. Saw him many times after that. Um, Took part in all the musical activities in this very big high school in Brooklyn. And so to me, it worked. It was positive. But of course, you can't account for people saying things and being stupid. But I don't remember that as being it because the teachers loved me because I was a good student.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that. So it was a minimal thing,
Yeah.
you know. Now, who else? I mean, just we're talking about. You're about 5 years older than me, I think. I'm 71 now.
I'll be 77 in a couple of weeks.
Right. So that's just about. I remember when I met you, I was uh, I was 18. Yeah, and you were about 24. Something like that.
Right, right.
And yeah, so I'm thinking that you among Col. Okay, you heard Coltrane a lot. You also that was like the prime years of jazz. We're talking about the late 50s, early 60s.
Yes,
You know, with
absolutely.
who else did you get to once you got the idea of listening
Um,
to jazz?
Horace Silver, Herbie Mann, Art Blakey. I mean, I just then swallowed up everything. It's all LPs, which, as I try to tell my students, we wore them out. I
Right,
mean,
yes, we did.
literally,
I
literally.
remember I had the Charlie Parker's record of "A Song Is You" is one of the things, and when it goes, "Let you know the song my heart would sing," I can't sing anymore because of this operation I had. But where it goes, where it, um, yeah, I wanted that note, that high F concert, that D on the horn, and I played that note 700 times until the record went da 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 da. That note was obliterated.
That brought you back to reality.
That brought me back to reality.
Yeah, can I do this? Oh, I don't know. I may have to practice it for a while.
Yeah, and I got close to that note. I remember sometimes I say, I think I got it there. But I
So,
remember,
so what happened? I mean, eventually it came down to what college, what would I do? I mean, when I go for, there were no jazz programs in New York at that time. There was John Mahegan and Lenny Tristano, who I did study with.
I'd like to know a little bit about that too.
And what happened was, I was inspired to be a doctor, orthopedic doctor, since I had the same thing. I'm wearing a brace right now. It's still got me. Um, and it was a distinction, actually. It actually helped me because I said to my parents, I said, I'll go to what I now recommend is kind of full circle, double major, meaning not that formal, but meaning that I decided to get a degree for teaching, and because it was something I had done already a little bit in high school and so forth. So that decision led me to say I want to play music, and I didn't know how serious it was. I said, "Oh, I'll take the saxophone. I don't know what I played, but it enabled me to see a window of opportunity that I don't think I would have had if I hadn't had this condition."
I see. Yeah, and So you started to study. You were playing saxophone, and you were still sort of a pre med type of situation as well. You had this double major,
Well, kind of, yeah, if you could call it.
but then what made you? When did you drop the medicine? And
Well, the Coltrane experience. I mean, that was the one night. This is February in 2000 in 1992. Uh, it's just those days. Not everybody went to university or to college. It was kind of a rare for for a young
that's
person. It's
I
hard
noticed
to
that.
believe now because of what's going on in education in the last 20 years, especially in jazz education. But that was a window to find something else. And I mean, I can't say I wanted to be Coltrane, but I did. How could I ever play like that? Could I ever
We
get
came close.
well,
You
I mean,
know.
could I ever really deal on that level? And I was, now I'm 18, 19, 20, and it gets a little more serious by that time. You got to make some decisions about what you're going to do.
Yeah. So is that when you found Joe Allard?
Joe Allard was out of the phone book because I had a teacher in Brooklyn where I spent Saturday mornings in piano, uh, saxophone, and combo ensemble. It was great. This was a family that had a beautiful house in Brooklyn, and they had teaching on lessons, and I was oh, I'm sorry.
You went to his house on Saturdays.
Oh, okay, okay. Lenny. And so I looked around and I, talked to my very good friend at that time, Mike Garson, piano player. And he said, you should check out Tristano. So we went, his father was a liquor salesman. So I spent one evening with him and my friend Mike carousing around clubs because he had an account with these clubs. So one of them was the half note. And it was Lee and Warren and then Lenny. you know. So that was
Right, right, right.
another nail in the coffin because those guys were playing something else on top of it. So um, yeah, but the Lenny experience, I've spoken about it a lot. But I tried. I went in the first lesson. He was very, he was not the warmest human being, but he was blind and he had his moments. I'm sure of frustration, being blind. And I had to come in. He said, now, he didn't know I was there. He didn't know who it was because he was blind. He said, play a B flat major scale from the bottom of the horn up to the top and back down again. Would seem like pretty simple for saxophone players. I couldn't get the B flat out. You know how hard it is to get a fucking B flat in the middle of
That is a tough one. I'm having trouble now, especially after this tracheostomy.
yeah.
You know,
It's
larynx.
so he said. After about 5 attempts at like blah blah, like sounding like Mount Vesuvius erupting. He said, "You go home and you practice that. And don't come back until you can do it." And that was it. That was the end of lesson one. So my lessons with him. Now, if you study with Lee, then you know what the lessons basically are. It's a lot of singing, it's transcribing, but not writing it down. It's play a melody and improvise over what you hear from the melodies. I play Pennies from Heaven, and to be melodic without the help of a piano or bass. So that was the extent of my formal training in jazz. And
How
Lenny was
long did you study with Lenny? How many lessons
about
did
a
you?
year. Every Sunday, not every Sunday, but.
I had
Now
one
another thing he did was he paid. If you missed a lesson, you had to pay him, which I couldn't believe that I was giving $25 over for about a 3 minute lesson.
Yeah, well, I had Lee send me to Lenny because Lee never showed me anything. Lee would my lessons with Lee, which I never paid for, was to me to go to Lee and we would play duets and talk about music and take a walk with his dog in the park, have dinner, play some more. And I'd say, Lee, how do you such and such? How do you this? And he'd say, you've got to go to Lenny to find that stuff out because I don't really, So I went to Lenny, and Lenny comes out, and he scared me at first. I remember because he had no dark glasses on, or
Right.
his eyes were quite scarred up.
Looked like Frankenstein. I thought.
He did look like Frankenstein. I've actually used
Oh,
that.
sorry to say.
Yeah, and he came out and he said, I'll never forget the spiel he gave me, which frightened me. He said, I've been playing and teaching this music for close to half a century now. And I believe that I've achieved and developed certain insights that are unique and original. And if you want access to these insights, you will you have to pay for them. And you have to study every week. And the line that I'll never forget is he says, and I mean every week, I don't care if your fucking grandmother dies.
Sounds like his attitude.
And so we played the piano, we played all the things you are. And, I thought I could, Lee I was pretty serious. I was like 18 and same age, and Lenny pounded the piano behind me like it owed him money, and he scared me. But he did tell me one great thing, which is one of those things that I told other people about this, but at the time you go, oh man, that's such a load of double talk. What the hell is he saying? Yeah, of course. But it's one of those things that 15 years later sinks in. You say, oh, that's what he meant.
Well, that's the thing that it takes me to, like, what I did get from him was, you can teach this music. Up to then, I believed in the myth. You can't teach creativity. You can't teach playing. Don't waste your time. Just go up and ask questions, something like that. And now, I realized that was nowhere near the way it became formal with Adasol and everything, but there was the beginnings of it. And it made sense to me. So, of course, you can teach this. So somehow, some of the knowledge can be passed down verbally without, having the London Philharmonic behind you. You know what I mean? You can do things anyway. And that's what I got from Lenny. It was possible to actually transmit the knowledge of this thing.
Yeah, but what Lenny told me was the one thing he said was that people talk about playing what they hear. He said, I'm not interested in teaching you that. I'm interested in teaching you to play what you don't hear.
Right. Very well said. Very well.
And I thought that was, later I said, oh, yes, I see what he means. Now, do you think that over, like, jazz education, since you're a pioneer in it and everything, I mean, I think it has its, like everything, there's the yin and the yang and the pros and the cons of it. I mean, do you think sometimes that I almost feel it's like academic inbreeding, because for people that have actually lived the experience of playing jazz live with people and, working at it, like yourself and me and Barry Harris and, Lenny, people like that, the field has kind of been taken over sometimes by people whose whole experience was going to school and then learning it in school. And then
no bandstand experience, or very little.
Yeah. How do you feel about, what's your view of the formalization of jazz education in general?
Well, like you said, like you were beginning to say, yin and yang, there's some great things about it and there's some things that aren't great about it. Once you would make a kind of pact with the devil, let's say, so I'm going to teach this and I'm going to teach 30 kids at the same time. That's hard to do. It's hard to teach math like that, let alone, Charlie Parker. And that's a disadvantage. On the other hand, the kid comes out of there and has some idea of another way of looking at things, because no matter what, it's going to come down to this kid listening to you play. And then the unspeakable takes over, which is you can't really explain it, but you can allude to it. You can read books on, there were things were starting to happen. David Baker had 60 books out. I mean, you really could organize the material. So it's a two-sided coin when you ask what I think of it, because in some cases it's very valuable. On the other hand, maybe it's a waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much an insightful way to think about it. Let's get back to your early experience. So you found Joe Allard in the phone book.
Yeah, I looked at, and I also spoke to Garvin Bouchel, who's on live at the Village Vanguard with Train. He played bassoon.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there were a couple other ones. Live at the Vanguard had a couple other, I think, it was Eric and Train's group. But anyway,
you were taking Joe Allard in the phone book.
Yeah, so I went to the phone book, looked on this instrumental, I don't know, saxophone lesson, something like that. And I called everybody. My mother said, you got to do it. You got to make the call on your own. So I did, and it was illuminating to be in such a situation with such a heavy as Lenny Tristano and Joe Allard. I mean, these are icon figures in education, and in some cases, like Lenny, and musically. And Lee, that whole school of thinking, which got a lot of attention, and a lot of negative attention as well as positive attention. The point is, there's something that can be done on any level. I'd rather not teach advanced students. I'd rather not teach the mediocre students, and I get a chance to do that pretty much with who I end up seeing. So it becomes more of a not a job, but it becomes more of a giving a way of hearing and of feeling that's organized. And we're going to look at some of the ways it's organized: 251, 3625, blah 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 blah. And we're going to take them apart and see, and then you'll have a better understanding of what this music is about, which is the name of the game.
Exactly. Now, teaching rhythm, especially,
Yeah,
like you and I have discussed that a little bit. Talking about when you made that record, Drum Ode,
yeah,
and of course working with Elvin, and the importance of of rhythm in the music. Because people, I've worked very hard at just an approach to teaching rhythm. The feeling of the African six, and the
yeah.
feeling of and understanding the upbeats, and various things. How do you approach teaching rhythm in a nutshell?
Well, in a nutshell, it's transcribing and copying. It's imitation. If you're going to play with Hank Mobley the way you could, which is exact, the guys who do this transcription thing are doing it exact. Then you have already you've what's the word? You've planted a seed that you might not even know about, but you can play like Hank Mobley for at least for 3 minutes on a track on Chicken Shack or something like that. And I tell the students, just do your transcription. We can talk about who to do. Maybe we don't start off with, like Lenny had me start off with Lester Young, of course.
Right.
And, so depend, that's the teacher. That's the responsibility of the teachers. What does this student need? Maybe he needs the what's it called? Um, I'm bad with memories notes, but in other words, if you're going to copy somebody and it's a model that's a great player, you're already getting a lot to do with the rhythm because the rhythm can't be written out. We write a dotted eighth and 16th to go ba ba da ba da, or we write the triplet with the middle left out. That's about all we can do technically to tell you, make you aware of those ways of looking at it. But basically, if you transcribe, you're going to get it again from the horse's mouth. And I
Yeah,
found
that's where I like the Konitz and Tristano thing of singing the solo,
yeah,
and then kind of taking it from your voice and not needing to write it out in a way. I mean, later you might want to write it out to see what it looks like.
right. Well, that I do make them do that, to understand how the guy thought, because I have a big thing on analysis. I'm like every note is analyzed, blah blah blah, etc. But
Yeah, I understand that too.
teaching rhythm is, I mean, it's very difficult teaching rhythm. It's the one melody, rhythm, harmony, color, form. It's the one that loses out from being too technical. And
Yeah,
and so I need the right teacher and the right person to transcribe.
that's true. Yeah, and finding the right material to study is I think that's what a teacher is trying to tell the student, just the right person that they may want to go in that direction, whatever direction they're in. One guy once, I sent you a student, or it was funny because this guy, his name was Dominic. I remember he's from Detroit. He took a few lessons with me, and he said, I really like what you're showing me, but what I really want to do is I want to learn to play like Dave Liebman. I like that style of playing, and I said I like that style of playing too, but I don't play like that. But here's Dave's number. I mean, if you want to study that,
I remember him.
you got it. I mean, I said, oh, okay. So, I mean, if people don't want your particular thing, then New York was great that way. You could say, oh, I understand. I'm not the flavor you want, but maybe, go to my friend here and he'll help you with that. But didn't happen often. I just remember that as one time where the guy was very nice about it. He said, I really am getting a lot, I think, from these lessons, but I really want to play this way. And you don't play that way. I said, yeah, that's true. and you
Well, it's a process, but the bottom line, Bob, is that we are passing on some voodoo shit. This thing about jazz and about music in general. I mean, classical music. I was just listening to Isaac Stern in an interview he did, and they got all ways of describing it, but basically they play it, and we're passing on a beautiful thing. Music has no enemies. Music is not dividing up into sides. They may try to divide it and say, he plays this way, he plays that way, whatever. But basically, music has no enemies. It's just the love of the moment and of the skills that go into making the moment meaningful. So if the bottom line is, when a kid comes out and he becomes an orthopedic doctor, he's already seen something that he might not have seen otherwise.
Yeah. I think also that element of friendship and kinship with each other is something that drew me just as strongly to being a musician, almost as the music itself. When you see the voodooish, the voodoo masters, like when I would have breakfast with Ira Sullivan and the guys in his band in Miami, and I would see Ira and just the way they would over coffee, coffee and cigarettes at Tyler's restaurant at 4 o'clock in the morning, be just interacting with each other, even if it was a chess game, that carried on to the bandstand later. Everything was about the music in its own way. When I got to hang out with Kenny Dorham and Wynton Kelly at Evelyn Blakey's house when I was a teenager, and I saw the depth of the friendship between Wynton and KD and Hank Mobley, and Paul Chambers was dying at this time, and the sadness these guys were feeling. I was like a fly on the wall, but I was there and feeling the depth of that friendship, and that's why that music had that depth to it.
Well, the hang is important because you're around people that are really have experienced and have lived longer than you. If you're 22 and you're with somebody who's 29 years old, he's already got 6 years on you, 7 years on you.
Exactly right.
So
Yes, I remember going out to the Village Gate, and you had those early morning sessions there with Mike Brecker brought me there, and you guys were playing. Actually, it sounded like Train at the Vanguard with Eric Dolphy and everything. That was kind of the bag you guys were in,
yeah.
playing very free. And that's the first time I heard you was playing that way. And then there was that feeling of friendship and unanimity of purpose.
I'll tell you a story. When I got the NEA Masters of Jazz Award, there's a lunch, and maybe 30 or 40 of the guys who got awards were there. And I remember me remarking to myself, the feeling in that room, this was all masters, quote masters, and the feeling in that room was unbelievable love, respect, beauty, honesty, truthfulness. I dare you to find a room full of another profession that has that kind of energy. I mean, that comes because the music passes it on. You don't have to say anything. If you listen hard enough, you get it. You get the point anyway. You don't have to. The only thing I'm going to do is explain it to you so you can get there faster. Or you know what? Maybe you don't even need to go there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's beautifully put, Dave. That's we've been feeling that off and on. To feel that intensity in one room at one time is something
Exactly.
that I can only imagine. But to different degrees, I think that's what that's what we've been doing. It's almost like being clergymen or something. We've got a love of the divine, however you want to express the divine, whether you're a Hasidic Jew or Jesus or whatever you're believing. Overriding all of that is the love for the divineness of the music.
You got it.
That's what we get. Speaking of which, was your family very? What kind of Judaism was practiced in your home? I'm just curious.
I mean, we did Passover, and maybe once in a while, Friday night type of thing, but very, ecumenical and basically culturally Jewish, but not in beliefs, I would say. I went to Hebrew school. I got a bar mitzvah, because that was kind of what you did as a young Jewish kid.
Right, I understand. I did the same.
Yeah, that's.
But it wasn't kosher or
No.
observant.
It was just the vibe, and But what was important was education. That was, that in that kind of family. It's not that nobody stuffed my face with it, but you're going to be able to read and write and present yourself in a literal, intellectual manner. Besides this thing you're calling jazz.
My grandmother had 9 sisters, and she once counted that there were 24 doctors in our family.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I mean, just counting the ones that had married doctors and the children became doctors, and she showed me that she had done this little survey in her own spare time, just checking out how many professional people. That didn't even count the lawyers and the other,
Right.
people that were. But that was what.
You find a lot of doctors are into music and into jazz. For some reason, there's a preponderance of doctors.
Yes, one of the chief producers of this record that I sent you that we're doing is a radiologist, and of course there's Denny Zeitlin. I had a therapist. I've had psychotherapists almost most of my adult life. I find it something that helps me, and I've had various kinds, Freudian, Jungians, but not too many. But I had one who died, unfortunately, and he was a great therapist. And he went out to California, for a psychological conference, one of those things they have. I said, "How was your conference art?" He said, "Oh, it was fascinating. There was one guy that was especially interesting." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." And he said he has innovations in neuropsychiatry. He said he was bringing concepts that were innovative, that were absolutely fresh and brilliant. And you may know him. He's a musician, Denny Zeitlin. And I said, "Wow, he's innovative in music and in therapy. He's like a double genius." Yeah,
Yes, I never met him, but I always have a lot of respect for him.
yeah, I've never met him either, but I just, when we knew who he was from, even from just writing that Quiet Now for Bill Evans and some of his own tunes. And, I mean, he's a brilliant guy. And I thought that was interesting because he was, somebody, my grandmother would have loved him. Now, also, let's say the cats you were hanging out with, like, okay, aside from going to school and studying with Lenny and Joe Ellis, that's the informal study that we were talking about, really, that also that camaraderie doesn't
Absolutely,
come from school, it comes from the hang, so the cats that
absolutely.
you were hanging with, there's some people that I really wanted to ask you about, besides Pete LaRocca, who I knew just peripherally, but did Tina Brooks, did you get to,
No,
you didn't, Tina Brooks, that was not a part of your scene.
no.
Who else was part of that of your early hangs?
The peers, Randy and Lenny White, and who else? I can't right now. I don't know, but
Right. So that was the period that I met you when it was Randy Brecker and Mike Brecker and Lenny White and
Terra Masahino.
Teru Mapihino, of course, and the Rising Sun. I mean, and Teru Nakamura, the Rising Sun. I'm sorry.
That's another one. Teru Nakamura. Yeah, there was a definite clique of these guys. We all loved the music, and
Al Galper was part of that too.
we were trying to find a way to keep the music alive but make a living because you got to do both.
Yes, and
So there was a crowd there, and if you were at like with Charles Lloyd, for example, I had asked Bob Moses. This is 65, 66. I wanted to get more into train. I didn't know what else to do. Um, so 556.
Bob
So
Moses and Charles
Bob
Lloyd.
Moses, who was my first real friend and colleague, and he was experienced already. He grew up in a family with his mother and father were involved in jazz in some reason. Anyway, I said to him, I said, who's the most played like train? And he said, Charles Lloyd. So immediately, of course, next time I were at the half note, I went up to Charles and I said, just boldly, as a kid, I don't know, I just said, do you teach? He said, no. And then he looked at me through his glasses, he put it down like, that means I'm serious. And he said, but you can come over tomorrow. You know where I live. And he happened to live opposite the Blue Note. Just happened to be that's where his lived. So,
The
and
Blue Note in Brooklyn at this time. Was that
excuse me,
where was the Blue Note?
Blue
Or was
Note
that,
what's 10, what's 6, whatever, right where it is now. It's the same
oh,
place. It's the same place.
still existed.
But it means that there was plenty of offhand, unofficial learning of this music that didn't have regimentation, didn't have what we talked about in universities and all that. And that you're saying, you call it the informal way of learning, and it's true. I mean, in other words, I remember seeing at Bradley's, Herbie and Bill Evans sitting at the piano while everybody was drinking. They were having a good time. They were training chords and everything like that.
Bradley's was my postgraduate university.
That was the place, man.
That was the place. We had. I remember. Yeah, I mean, be sitting there. Bradley would go to the piano. He closed the club. Remember, and the
Oh, yeah.
club was officially closed.
Officially.
And then officially, and then the real thing happened. I mean, though the real thing was always happening at Bradley's. He had these wonderful duos. I'm just telling that to people who might not know what Bradley's was. Bradley Cunningham was a huge fan of music,
Ex-Marine.
ex-Marine, and an amateur piano player,
And a very good one by
and
year.
a very good amateur piano player. Yes, and I remember it was almost like a ritual. At the end of the night, Bradley would sit at the piano for a minute after everybody was hanging out, and he'd start to play a tune. He'd be, for heaven's sake, let's fall in love. There's no mistake to fall call it love. Next thing you know, there would be Tommy Flanagan, you know, um, Albert Daly, Kenny Barron, whoever was hanging out that night.
Ronnie Matthews.
Ronnie Matthews all the time. Yeah.
Funny.
Yeah. And they'd just be saying, well, I like this change here.
Yeah, yeah,
So the
exactly.
bar four, I like to play the
So it shows the informal, informal passing it on. That was the the, the way we did it. Besides formal lessons, that I studied with Charles for a year, and then I studied with Lenny for a year. Was unheard of in those days.
yeah, I mean, that was, Pat LaBarbera pointed that out to me one time when Pat and I had first started, we met. He played me some records. We were sitting around. And he said, "Listen, here's some early Charles Lloyd. Now listen, here's Liebman. You hear that influence?" And he was saying that
Yeah.
how you had a Charles Lloyd influence in your.
Yeah, I did, and I never went about doing it. But when I heard it a couple of years later, I said I do have more than several debts to pay to Charles because he had a certain way of playing, which kind of old train like. And but on the other hand, he kind of misled me. I'll tell you this story. Um,
How
one,
so?
one lesson, there weren't really lessons, but I was in the pad, the piano there, and I was wondering where the chord change thing was. This was 65, 66. Charles, how do we play like changes? He said, "You mean like this?" And he played Olio solo, Coltrane's Olio solo, right there for me, right there, like that. I said, "Wow." He said, "You don't need that. Your generation plays better than ours did. Just continue to do what you're doing." And of course, I took heed. He was my teacher, and I learned a lot of love and respect for him. I mean, that was exactly the wrong thing to tell me. I was looking for a way out. He gave me the way out. "Oh, you played free," or whatever that is. You know what I mean? So I'll never forget that. But he was a very positive, beautiful cat.
Well, there was
He
that
is.
concept that that playing free was the evolution, was the next step
Yes,
in jazz, and
yes, it
um,
was.
you know, it was, and but it didn't really obliterate the idea. Like, I mean, like, you've gone between all of those bags, and I have too, in a way. I was playing with Paul Bley and things like that, and playing some very free oriented things, but that didn't stop me from still wanting to play changes.
Yeah.
To play harmony and that kind of thing. In fact, the last time I saw Jimmy Garrison, I was over at Jimmy's house several days before he passed, and I was over for dinner with Beaver Harris. Beaver Harris and I were the two dinner guests, and after dinner, Beaver said to me, "Oh, come on, man, because I did some free playing with Beaver and Jimmy. Man, you great free player. That's the next step. You don't need to play no bebop no more, and this and that. Come on, join. Play this way, and that." And I was like 24, 25 years old. I thought I was just tapping the surface of how to play on changes and songs. I said, "Well, Beaver, I don't know about that, this and that." And Jimmy, who'd been quiet the whole time and weighed about 90 pounds,
Yeah.
disappears for a minute, and he came back to the room carrying his bass, which was larger than he was at this point. And he just takes out the bass, and I had my horn with me, and he starts to play boop boop bee dee da doo dee doo dee dee. He starts to play Solar, and I got my horn out, and I played a couple of chords of the Solar, and Jimmy stopped. He was sounding beautiful. He said, "I'm sorry, I don't have the strength to go on."
Yeah.
And at the funeral, Roberta, Jimmy's wife, said she wanted to thank me because she said that was actually the last time that Jimmy had played his bass. But there was that question of
Well,
now you
well,
graduate to free music.
well. The thing is, this is. I think I'm not sure, but George Russell's proponent have said that the avant-garde is the refuge of the untalented.
I think Mingus was supposed to have said that, but one of those people, the last refuge of the untalented.
And something could be said about that as being there's some truth in that. Uh, but now is another story. We're talking mid '60s when everybody was seemingly doing it.
Well,
Playing.
that's what
They were playing the free, but the free like yelling, screaming type free. With six saxophones in the room.
well, energy.
You know,
Energy was a big thing, though. Like, I mean, I used to call it energy music. Content took a back seat to
exactly,
the sheer energy at times,
exactly.
and even some of those sessions at the gate. I mean, I was overwhelmed listening to it. I mean, I was just a young guy, 18 years old, and you guys were playing great, but there was so much energy and so much going on. I was like, I mean, I still have, it's still hard for me sometimes to follow some of that, but uh, even though I've partaken in it, and it's really fun to do.
Well, it's fun, and it's fun when you have a couple of horns to bounce off of. And on my loft on 19th Street, that was it. I had constant playing.
I remember that, and I remember when
He must have
Mike,
been
I think Mike bought that loft for you, Mike Brecker.
Mike bought he bought that, and then I think he moved into Grand Street.
Right, he did after that. But when Mike was up at your loft, which had been your loft, that was a period where Mike and I were practicing a lot together. And I remember you may have been by there, once, but mostly I remember Bob Berg
Yeah,
and Steve Grossman and rhythm sections changing. Al Foster would be up there, Junie Booth,
yeah.
um, all the cats. I mean, and Mike and I used to play for a day or two sometimes. I wouldn't go home. I'd just hang out there with Mike. And I remember we would keep playing. We'd play for a few hours with one rhythm section. Then the next rhythm section would come in. And then the next one we'd play with maybe two or three, so I remember those days and you were part of that. You were a center of that actually. And, I do remember that type of, those type of exchanges.
And
Uh,
I just want to mention Pete LaRocca, who was one of the great drummers of all time, and unfortunately didn't follow that path. As we know, he became a lawyer. Um,
Pete Sims.
Pete Sims, and New York kid, played timbales. Supposedly cut Tito Puente down at a Monday night at Birdland. Supposedly, uh,
I wouldn't doubt it. And Tito was not bad.
but I learned a lot from him. He was definitely my first real big influence. That was not a peer, but was a senior. Even though he was 30 years old when I was 20, let's say, and he helped me through a lot of decision making. I'll tell you one fast one.
Sure.
I was, I was drunk with what I was doing, and I thought it was a waste. I was quartet. It was Chick Corea and Steve Swallow played the Vanguard, and I was very upset at the way I played. And I went down. And I went to Pete. I could talk to him like this. I said, I don't know what to do. I'm in a bind. He said, you're making trouble for yourself. Forget about it. Just put the horn in your mouth. He said, do you think you respect me, right? I said, yeah. He said, then you think that if I needed you, I wouldn't let you know that you're done. That you will outlaw your visit. I said, no, you're Pete LaRocca. He said, all right. He said, well, that's all you need. He said, you just need to get past the psychological barrier that's hanging you up. And I said, thank you very much. And of course, what happened? Another story. But he was an unbelievable drummer, incredible.
When somebody unbelievable believes in you,
Yeah,
that really there's no other impetus better than that.
you got it.
I mean, I've had similar experiences with a couple of great players that kind of, when I've certainly had my insecurities and doubts and, all of those kind of things that almost overwhelm you. And, to have mentors like that is what and fortunately years later, I was in the position to maybe help some younger players with their confidence, because it's something that gets passed down, as that story illustrates. Now, when we were talking about friendship too, I don't think I can talk to you without mentioning the importance of your friendship with Richie Byrack. I
Yes,
mean, we all have different cats that we hook up with at certain points. I've had a few like that. One of them was Albert Daly, where we almost had a telepathic. We never had to talk to each other, though we might sometimes, about, but not about how to play or how to do it or how to play with each other. And it seems that you and Richie, I mean, have through maybe many hours of working it out together, come to some, this beautiful understanding with an affinity of approach. And so, how did you guys hook up? How did you meet? Tell me a little bit about Richie.
we met at a jam session in Queens, 1967, and famously, I took him outside after we played, and I said, "You got to learn these tunes left and right, and gave him a list of standards, and you got to, be able to solo on them." And there's a
You
yellow.
told him this.
Just this is me telling Richie, yeah, and there was a booklet of two modern jazz tunes. I said, you should
I
learn all
remember that the yellow book,
the book. Yes, sir. That's
yeah, the
right.
yellow cover, and the plastic binding on the end
Right. That's right. That's right.
there.
Uh, he
Russ
said
Freeman tunes and Clifford
yeah,
Brown.
he
They
was
were
very,
they.
he was glad. He said, thank you very much. And the next time we played, he had, 300% improvement. And me too. Thing is, Richie's a master of harmony. I'm a melody guy. I play one note at a time, and but I understand harmony from his standpoint. The general diatonic harmony that we all know, and then there's the specialized harmony of Wayne Shorter tunes, and then there's the Chick Corea type tunes. Um, but
Less cyclic.
yeah,
Uh,
it cycles. Understandable. Whereas when we came in and started doing that, but I mean, of course, Elvin, Live at the Lighthouse, that has a lot of evidence of that kind of playing. You know,
yeah, I
incorporating it into like the regular language. That was the thing. If it's standing alone, it was one thing, but if you could put it into like all the things you are, for example, that's another level.
yeah. I mean, I've had my Richie experience, and not always pleasant because he played beautifully for you, and you guys could hear it sort of the same way. And I would have had to have played even more. When you broke your leg, I subbed for you in
Oh, the Canada thing.
at Kongsberg.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
they called me, and Richie was kind of upset because he wanted to play trio since you weren't going to make it, and they already told him that they had enough piano trios there. They needed somebody besides Jan Garbarek with a horn trio, so he could choose between me. I happened to be in Norway, in between going to another country. I was taking a few days off, and I happened to be free those days, or a Norwegian saxophone player. And Richie said, "Well, because Ron and Ron McClure and Billy Hart said you better let's get Mover, let him come on, he'd be fun." And Richie said, "All right," and reluctantly had me. But Richie reharmonized to the point where I felt like I was in ear training 101. He was throwing shit at me, all over the place. And I did my best. But I still felt like I asked Richie, could you once in a while just give me a chorus of the changes that I know? Even though there's many ways to play a song, and I reharmonize a lot as well. But, but Richie is quite brilliant. And you guys understood. That's what I felt. That you guys had this innate understanding of how to put your melodies with his harmonies.
Yeah.
And I never heard you sound like you were playing Ear Training 101. I don't think I made it with him very well, but you made it, some beautiful.
Well, I remember this happening. Actually, now it's coming back to me. I remember you took my place, and they went on to Europe, I think.
Yeah, I had other gigs. I happened to be free and hanging out in Scandinavia for a few extra days, and they called me and they said, "Are you free for these days?" And it was, I was, and it ended up being a great time as well because Joe Henderson was there with Woody Shaw, and I knew Woody quite well, but I'd known Joe a little bit, but I actually got 2 days to hang with Joe, and that was like a wonderful experience to just.
Oh, so it worked. I should break my leg more often.
No. So keep your leg. And now, did you get to know people like Joe Henderson and Joe Farrell, and because New York had these tenor players, like Mike Brecker and I used to go out and hear people a lot together, and I know two people that were strongly influencing Mike at the time, besides you, and I mean Grossman and Bob Berg. You guys were all influencing each other. But of the elders at that time, I thought the two, Joe Farrell and Joe Henderson, and Joe Farrell could play so well sometimes. I thought he was neck and neck with Joe Henderson at times. Did you have any experiences with either of those guys?
Well, Joe Henderson, no, and Joe Farrell, I took his place with Elvin. That's the genealogy, and he was not very open and very friendly at all. So I can't tell you any good positive stories.
Yeah, I used to hear Joe with Elvin down at Pookie's Pub.
Yeah.
They had a trio with Jimmy Garrison, and I used to go to the half note every night and listen to Roy Eldridge and sit in actually with Zoo. This is when I was 16. I believe the year was 68, and Elvin was down at Pookie's. And I remember one night I used to go in between sets. I'd go over to Pookie's, and Roberta Garrison was so sweet. She let me sit with her because I was underage She said, if anybody asks, you're my little brother. And so I listened to a set with Joe and Jimmy Garrison and Elvin, and that was, and then go back and listen or sit in with Roy Eldridge across the street and Sue
That's
Sims and those people.
the
But
ability.
one night I asked, I said, I'm going over to Pookie's. They said, oh, Elvin's not at Pookie's anymore. I said, what happened? They said he got angry at the owner and he tore the place apart. Did you know that story?
I don't know about tearing the place apart, but the owner was, we were paid well. This is not the Pookie's, but there was a club called the La Boheme on 69th and Broadway,
I remember that. Yeah.
and that was what was that? What was it? What's the
Elvin's
oh, Pookie's
Elvin's
Pub.
propensity at times for being a little
There you go.
violent.
You got it. Well said. Getting a little bit funky at times, and I could see where he was known for being a little voracious, you know. But I mean, he did of our 2.5 years together with him and Elvin, and I mean Steve and Gene. There was no time where he was personally antagonistic to us, but he could really get into something with somebody else if it was the wrong mood. And for him, it was like by the time he got to the second drink, rum, you weren't sure which Elvin would come through.
By the time he got to what, Dave?
The
The second drink, you said?
yeah, rum,
Rum. He liked rum, huh?
straight up. And so he could get a little bit wild, you know what I mean. But that was made it spicy, you know what I mean. He knew he was being a little wise guy, you know.
Uh-huh. About the way he played, I became pretty good friends with Hank. And Hank, and I wonder, Elvin might have mentioned this to you, uh, that he felt that Elvin played the way he did because he had been born a twin. And he had a twin brother named Alvin who had died. And Hank felt that Elvin was playing for two, that he was making up for his twin. He said that was Hank's theory about Elvin playing the way he did. Did anybody ever mention
No,
that to you?
no, that's a beautiful story. Elvin was last of nine boys, I think, and Dad Hank was the chief over there, you know.
Was the oldest? Yeah, I mean, I think
And
it was 15 years between them or something.
yeah, and that was the nine grandsons or whatever they were. But Elvin was the ocean and the sky at the same time. You know, he was unbelievable what he could play. And this Pookie's Pub CD, I haven't listened to it yet, but I think that captures it. I'm sure because the guy who put it together knows what's going on. You know, so it's right here. In fact, Pookie's
They,
Pub.
oh, they have records of him from that trio with Joe Farrell or with you?
No, that's Billy Green. I forget who Billy Green and so I think Steve might be on some of it. I wasn't.
Because, yeah, I sat in with you guys one time in Boston in around 1970 at the Paul's Mall Jazz Workshop. And I feel I really didn't do very well that night. I sat in and it was one of those very modern tunes that Elvin called. I was 18 and I'd been playing with Jackie Byard. And so I'd had, some experience of very modern things with Jackie, but, the kind of thing you were playing with semi-modal and it was jumping around and nobody put any music. I was playing it by ear and I sat in and I think I was just hung on for dear life and listened to you guys who had mastered that stuff. Steve Grossman whispered as before we started to play, he says to me, "See you Sunday at Train's house." So I never actually after that, I was always a little afraid. Everybody in the world was sitting in with Elvin at the Vanguard years later. The
Yes,
tenor players were lined up like they were about to catch a train somewhere,
right. That's right.
but I
When
said, well,
they would ask me if they could sit in, I said, "You got to talk to him." And he was pretty cool with that. He was okay. He says, "You know my tunes. You know my tunes." And you'd say, "Yeah, yes." So, but he
yeah,
would.
well, I figured he'd heard enough, I mean, and I was still a little taken aback from the time I sat in and didn't like what I did. But Steve Grossman. Well, what can we say about Steve?
Well, he was a prodigy, and in this day and age, the prodigies are, a dime a dozen. In fact, I just just came past my desk yesterday or today, a lady playing flute on giant steps, doing the whole thing. So, but in those days, there were not that many geniuses walking the street. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean,
And he was that of that category. I mean, his brother had taken him down in the basement, and said, "You do this before you can go out and play basketball." I don't know. There's all kinds of stories, but he could play like Bird, and he went into training. He sounded more like trained than anybody really that I ever heard, including myself.
yeah, and then he kind of went more to Sonny toward the end of the last several years of his life. And I remember him because we were the same age and both in New York in the city. And I was also kind of a prodigy. And but everybody would say to me, "So have you heard Steve Grossman?" And I was kind of playing a little bit like Bird and Konitz kind of. I was already hanging with Lee, and Phil Woods had been an early teacher of mine too. And and Steve was playing more like Bird and Cannonball and that kind of approach to things. And he was bad. There
Yeah.
was another guy named Nelson too, who was a Puerto Rican alto player, friend of Hilton Ruiz, and he died rather young. But he was playing with Art Blakey when he was about 18 for a while. And but I do remember, Steve as I think he had a kind of a bipolar type of personality
At
that
the least, at the least, he did.
at the least, I mean, if they had diagnosed him with something and maybe straightened him out, he wouldn't have had to self-medicate.
Somebody is writing a book, doing a film supposedly on Steve. So, because he asked me for some quotes, so it remains to be seen. But when guys pass, it becomes more legendary. You know,
Right. That's what happens. I mean,
the best thing for your career is to pass.
yeah. Well, I'm thinking about Sonny Rollins
Yeah,
these days. How Sonny must feel like. I just saw this thing about Jazz in Harlem Week and everything on Channel One. Which is our local television station in New York. Um, and they're talking about they've got a big picture of Miles Davis there, and we're celebrating 100 years of Harlem and blah 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 and all this. And I'm thinking now it's Sonny, who no longer plays, but he's still alive and he's up living in upstate near Woodstock, in that area. And I mean, there's a picture of Miles and there's this and that. Sonny, who grew up on Sugar Hill
yeah,
and comes from Harlem and is Harlem,
yeah.
and yet and had his little rivalry with Miles. I mean, we have friendly rivalries with each other.
Yes.
I mean, the competitive aspect is something we'll get into for a second. I'd like to ask you about that, but so I'm thinking, when I saw that thing on television the other day, and I saw the big picture of Miles and Harlem and Miles and this and that, and they mentioned, they don't mention Sonny or Jackie or the Sugar Hill Mob. Um, but I mean, had Sonny died, that's what we were talking about. I mean, if Sonny had passed, then there would be, I mean, all kinds of tributes
Yeah.
and this and that. So yeah, I mean,
Well,
you know,
we wait for better news, and he can't play, or he can't. What is it? What is it?
he has pulmonary fibrosis,
Which
which
means
is like the worst aspects of emphysema, and you can't play. And I mean, he can talk, but he's on oxygen full time, as am I, and I don't know the particulars of it. And there's there are other aspects that are affecting him too, but I'm not going to go into that. But nevertheless, he's physically incapacitated, and just for a guy like Sonny Rollins not to be able to play the horn anymore, and
yeah,
his wife is no longer with him,
it's
and he doesn't have children.
a tragic story. It's tragedy.
It is a real tragedy. Yeah, and Sonny was like that to me too. I mean, when I met Sonny, I, I, to make a long story short, it's much like your Charles Lloyd story. I said, "Do you teach?" And Sonny said, "No, I don't teach." But and I looked kind of disappointed. Oh, I didn't think so. He said, "But we can practice together," and and we did. And I knew Sonny, I mean, over 50 years, and we would practice on the phone together. You know, the telephone practicing, phone sax, I used to call it, was
It's great, man. It's
Mike
great.
Brecker and I didn't have time to see each other sometimes, so we'd play over the phone. Hey man, check out this. I'm playing this. This is minor thirds, minor seventh chords and major thirds, or like whatever the pattern was. This type of thing, and or just talking about a song or about what changes do you play, what substitute do you use on Stella or whatever. Tom Harrell was part of that too,
Yeah.
and Sonny, I would actually, get my horn out and say this passage of such and such. I mean, like, and ask. Just, I was fortunate to have this kind of relationship with him. Again, the mentor thing.
Yeah.
Did you get to know Sonny at all, or?
No, no, we met once. No, but, no.
Yeah, he's quite a guy. He
Well,
told
for
me.
me, I mean, his musically, the '60s was really the high point, in my opinion.
I think so too. I mean,
And in fact, to such a degree that I'm always puzzled by his uh, seemingly not caring that much about keeping a group together. He had groups and he had groups. The one with
yeah. Well,
Don Cherry and Grimes and Billy. And there were a couple of things I just never could understand. I
well,
mean,
I think we all have an Achilles heel, and I think in some ways, I'm trying to say this tactfully because we are friends. I mean, Sonny is my friend, and having known Bob Cranshaw and Ben Riley and those guys very well, I've had a lot of musical association and personal association with those cats, and Jim Hall, all of them who were my friends. Um, Walter Davis Jr. Sonny didn't like anybody overshadowing him.
yeah,
So sometimes I think the thing was he found people who were not quite up to his level, and he felt that he might shine more, with you know, and I feel that that's an off base philosophy from my point of view, but I could see it in effect sometimes in Sonny's music. That one night Walter Davis Jr. was on fire. I mean, he was playing. It was the closest you might ever hear to Bud Powell in person. Man, he was burning. And Sonny was into it. He was playing Three Little Words, and he was playing Strode Road. And Walter went up to him after the concert. He said, "Sonny, that stuff we were playing tonight, man, we got to do more of that. Why don't we do that more often?" And Sonny says, "Too hard, Walter. Too hard."
yeah. But I really think he missed a he didn't take much advantage of the opportunity to be as great as he was. You know what I mean?
I think that's
Uh,
that's unfortunate but true.
yeah, and because the tapes from the '60s, man, the live shit is just unbelievable. I mean, it's the rhythm, talking rhythm, that way he's playing rhythm at time, making me in and out of the pulse, and it's fantastic. But on the other hand, I feel
Yeah, I
like,
think that was in its own way was as innovative as Coltrane was in his way. Had he gone continued in that direction, that would have had the same. I would hope he would have the same effect. That Train had. I mean, there was a. Yeah. Anyway, we don't want to beat a dead horse, but anyway, that night when Walter was on fire, Sonny kind of was visibly bugged at him. Sometimes he would turn around and he'd cut him off. He'd just start playing in the middle of Walter. Walter wouldn't be finished, and Sonny would come back in. And Walter said, "Yeah, well, Sonny sometimes has some uh, personal things, I guess, against me or something. He
he,
doesn't."
he also didn't like to record, and you can hear it when his records. They're kind of slapped together some of the time.
Though there was a magic period, I think in that late '50s, right through the bridge, and
Yeah,
but I mean
the live shit from Europe is unbelievable. With Niels Hennings and
oh yeah, that's some amazing stuff.
Kenny Drew, but he didn't like piano that much, as we noticed.
Well, he liked to play trio. I think because he was so adept at turnarounds. Like one Albert Daly one time when I first started to know him, he was working with Sonny, and he said, "You know what it is, Bob, that makes Sonny sets him apart from the rest of the cats." I said, "Well, I ventured to guess his rhythm and blah 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 this and that." He said, "Well, yes, all that, but there's one thing especially." I said, "What is it?" He has absolutely mastered the turnaround.
Interesting.
You never know where he's going to come from harmonically. all of a sudden he'll be playing some substitutes in a certain way that are totally his approach to harmony. He said, and that's what people neglect is such a strong part of Sonny's music, is how he's completely mastered the turnaround. Most cats play two or three variations that they know, where Sonny has a way of doing that, where he would like when you're talking about the thing with Byrack and reharmonizing the standards, that's sort of to the nth degree of the same concept
Yeah.
of finding ways to play the turnarounds in a spontaneous and original fashion, which you do as well. And so I think that was something that Sonny was with, where a piano might get in his way, because sometimes piano players tend to play the same turnarounds and might lock you into something. That's my venture.
So we're going to continue. I have a suggestion.
Sure.
Do part two some other time.
Yeah, we could do that.
Just think, this is great because you have a lot of commonalities with me, and we have a lot of history together, and we have looking afar. Plus, my voice is kind of going out a little bit. So,
well, I think we've covered quite a bit too.
I mean, are you almost?
The only other thing I really wanted to get in today was Karis. Just the fact that you have had a very a very nice, successful marriage relationship for a long period of time, and she seems to take part in a lot of your musical and
Karis.
So I wanted to see if she would like to appear for a moment. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I did a wonderful interview once with Hank Jones and his wife, Theodosia, Teddy. And it was so lovely because they had met, they talked about their relationship, that I thought we should have a TV series called Lovebirds, about people in various professions who have had long marriages, and what that's been about. So that's a whole separate interview, of course. But just while you're there, Karis, hi.
Hi, Bob. Hi.
Nice to see you. And I just wanted to know, let's start with how did you two meet and hook up? What's the story? What is the basis of your love story, so to speak?
Okay, should I tell him?
He can rest his voice. He said his voice is tired, so this is the perfect time for you to come in.
Okay, so I had gone to Berklee College of Music in 1979. Let's see if I can get a seat coming this way. And I was a jazz performance major there, actually on oboe. Although I studied oboe with a teacher that was very hooked up with John Delancey, the Philadelphia Orchestra, because I'm north of Philadelphia is where I grew up. Okay. But I always loved jazz. I had an older brother. He's 7 years older. And at the time I was like 11 years old. And he was at the University of Miami when Pat Metheny was there, and Danny Gottlieb and Mark Egan.
Yeah, I grew up in Miami. Mark Egan was one of my he was a trumpet player. And yeah. I used to give lessons. I was in Jerry Coker's band, in the university band when I was in high school. And I would charge $3 a lesson.
Oh, wow.
Lessons to the guys in the band. And Mark Egan was actually my student when he was a trumpet player. So I remember
Pat plays trumpet, and Pat's brother and Lyle also played trumpet. They were all trumpet players. But
go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So my brother had gotten me into jazz at a very young age, like when I was 11 years old. And I ended up playing oboe, but I always loved soprano saxophone and always wanted to have that sound grafted onto oboe, just like one of those coincidental things. Yeah. So what happened was I went to Berklee in Boston, and at the time I was also playing alto saxophone, but I never felt like I was really had an affinity for the instrument. Plus there's great saxophonists. And Joe Viola had said to me, you know what, oboe's your natural thing. That's what I would do. I said, absolutely right. I had already been playing a number of years. So I got an English horn and sold the alto. So anyway, so here I am, I'm in Boston. It's 1979. And David came up to play with Pat Metheny. And Pat was kind of I had known him my whole life because of my brother. And I would go to Riles a lot. I don't know if you remember Riles in
I
Cambridge.
remember Riles in Cambridge. Sure.
So I would go over, and whoever Pat would bring up from New York, I would come over and check it out. So he was having Dave Liebman come over. I was like, oh my God, this is great. Soprano player, this will be great. I never saw him in person. So I go to the club to see Pat, and I meet David. And this is like 1979. And I must have been like 18 at the time. And it was just in passing. And in fact, it was very unusual, very strange. I said, how are you? He said, fine. He said, I just got married like a couple weeks ago. My wife's sitting over there. We drove up for the gig. I said, oh, wow, that's great. Congratulations. I never looked over. I just didn't think of anything. It's the only time I was ever in the same room with his ex-wife. How bizarre, right? Never thought. And I'm like 18 years old. So I'm thinking, if you would think that I would end up with this guy marry him in 1986, you got to be crazy. The guy just got married. I'm 18 years old. Like, it was like such a weird thing. It was just, he's just telling me, yeah, I just drove up. I just got married. Congratulations. But then the story unfolds. So anyway,
years later.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. So I'm at Boston. I do all my core up there, ear training, arranging, harmony, the whole thing. And I decide that the only way to really get this instrument on the map is I should switch to composition and be able to write it into all these different situations. So I moved to New York, and I was Joe Lovano's first student. Joe really didn't teach at all. And I had been doing some lessons with George Garzone, and he said, if you go down to New York, look my friend up, Joe Lovano, and I did. And I ended up studying with Joe for 3 years.
Oh.
And so I'm there, and I'm kind of looking for David. I'd like to get a lesson from him or something. And Joe had a loft, 23rd Street, and upstairs was a good friend of David's.
Right, the old Vanguard.
He said, you know who just came into here before your lesson? I said, no. He says, Dave Liebman. I said, where is he? He said, oh, he's getting divorced, and he's bought a house in Long Island. He doesn't live in the city anymore. And I said, oh, okay. So I kind of knew that and was kind of, there. And I, just in passing, didn't think anything of it. And I thought this is like about 3 years later after I saw him when he first got married. He broke his leg. It was a very bad situation. So just went right by me. A few years later, I had a group in New York, and we had been recording, and I did a demo, and I bumped into him, and I was with a friend, and she said, oh, you should really check out Karis' tapes on this thing that she's doing and whatever. I sent it to him, and he really liked it. He called me, and, he said, if you're ever in town, come down to the Vanguard. And a few months later, I went down to the Vanguard just to say hello. And then about 5 months later, I got a call from him. I never gave him my number either. He found it through information.
Uh-huh.
I just said, any thoughts on this recording?
It took some effort.
Yeah, any thoughts on this
days.
on this recording would be helpful. The next time you're in town, I'll drop by and you can, tell me about it. I never left my number or anything like that. And one day I was just eating dinner in my apartment. I lived down in the Village, and my roommate, who was working in the banking industry, no musician at all, says, oh, this is a landline phone. Oh, there's a guy on the phone. Dave Liebman's looking for you. And I wouldn't even been a joke because she's not even a musician. You can't, she would never know. I said, who did you say? She said, Dave Liebman. I said, I picked up the phone. I'm like, Dave? He goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, I found your number. I just want to tell you, I really enjoyed this recording, whatever. So it was kind of funny. So then a few months later, I went to the Vanguard. I saw him there. We talked and whatever. Just still, this is like years. Now I'm like 23 maybe. And so a few months later, he came back from Israel. He called me up and he actually asked me out. And I was a little taken aback by that. But then on the other hand, not really. I don't know. He was just like, hey, would you like to meet for a drink, or would you like to go out to dinner? And I was like, oh, okay, fine. But I was not thinking in that direction. And we started dating, and I'll tell you, we had so much in common that we talked about music, but that was not really what we were really talking about. We were talking about a lot of other things. And so that was like 1983. And then I graduated at NYU like in 84, and we got married in 86. Oh. And that's how we met. I was going to Riles to see a gig that Pat had. Very casually met him there, no big deal. And then a couple years went by. He found me through a project I was doing, reconnected, and then we actually did go out.
So there's a long incubation
Exactly.
period there.
And he is someone that I never formally studied with in that way. So it wasn't like I was studying with him and I ended up dating him. It wasn't like that. I was dating him and then we started to do music together. And then of course, there was all this exchange. So it was a whole other thing. It was
And you've kept up with your music as well since you've been
yes.
together, right? You didn't just drop it, though you became
No,
a mother. I mean, am I correct? Is your daughter is
it's Lydia Liebman from
really, and she's your daughter?
yes, she's our
I
daughter.
was just, it wasn't from the first marriage or something, because sometimes that
No,
happens.
he was only married like 3 years. There were no children. It was just like one of those things. And
I understand that too.
yeah.
Um,
And yeah, so uh, what happened was because I was a composition major, my hand was really good with writing. And in the early 80s, I started a company in New York called Karis Music Copy. And I would do manuscripts for people, back in the day when you'd have National Endowment for the Arts, they would give people grants. Like, I'm working on a project and I need this much for the copyist. And, it was like a real thing. There were
yeah,
guys
I
that
have
went like Bob Belden took me into
I
one of
remember
these,
Bob. Sure.
yeah, where these guys were like lined up and they were stamping and they were, doing the manuscript. And that was a big, big business back then. Then when it went to computer, I was one of the first ones to do it on computer. Mark of the Unicorn this is way before Finale and that type of thing. And I was doing things that were printed on the computer. And then I would hand sew the scores. I mean, there's some out there that are like
You know,
Andy.
I have some questions about that actually concerning this project I'm on. I'm not going to ask it to you now, but you're going to be hearing from me a little later, and
Yeah.
specific questions concerning copying. So you've done all that copying. I mean, Dave has like a tremendous amount of material printed. I mean,
Yes.
where in those books they're very clearly delineated examples of what Dave's talking about, and it's so admirable that I was wondering if he sat there all that time and wrote all that
Well,
stuff.
his manuscript was terrible.
Yeah, no one
It was
Yeah,
so
mine
bad.
too.
And I ended up copying stuff for him. But then it got to the point where I said, I cannot do this for you. This is driving me insane because you want to change this, you want to change that. I taught him a lot of stuff too, how to cut out the measure, glue it on. This is way before computers and copy and paste and that type of thing. So I had that going. And then at that time, and then I was in New York and I had a small group of my own. And, I was doing a lot more playing. That was in the early 80s. Then when I had this business, he was starting with a company called Advanced Music in Rottenburg, Germany.
I remember I heard that was a wonderful company that's out
Yes. And I was a copyist and they needed people, to do some of their work. And I sent it in and it turned out that there was a family member in their family that really needed like a job. And so he got it. He was the one that was doing all the copying. So I said, but what is this other thing you're doing? You're bringing books into the United States by American musicians. And I was very interested in distribution. And so we moved in 1986 to Pennsylvania, right over the Jersey border, 10 minutes from Phil Woods' house. And we lived there.
Stroudsburg, around that area.
Yeah, for 34 years,
Mhm.
because I knew the area. And at that point, I got into distribution of educational music books. And I said to Advanced Music, you're foreign, you need more exposure. I'm going to try to get it into the country more. And that's what I did. I had it on, 48th Street. I had it, everywhere. So that was the crux of the business. And I shifted then from copying to distribution. And at the same time, played, but started to develop this ear training thing I do, which is part the Lenny Tristano singing with the solos, the Berkeley movable dough thing. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I do.
So
I do a lot of that. We're going to talk about that at some point.
Yeah, so I incorporated all of that in, and I did distribution. A lot of people knew me from Karis Music Services for like about 25 years. I did that.
And now you have your daughter is also involved in the music business as a public relations person.
Yeah,
So you've got a whole family operation going up there.
Yeah, she's doing very well with that. I think she's like one of the top 3 music promotions, especially for jazz. And
Right.
yeah, so she's in that aspect of the business. And then when she graduated, she went to Emerson and Berkeley in Boston, got a degree in production. Then I got out of the distribution business. And I,
Anyway, I've got to wrap this up soon, but I just wanted to thank Dave in general for, and you as well,
Mhm.
for being here. And I have another thing to thank Dave for, which I've been waiting about since 1975 to 1974 to thank him for this. When you came to Brazil with Miles, and next time we'll talk about Miles and everything. But you know, we spent a day together, and Dave came to where I was staying. Mike Brecker had given Dave my information that I was down in Rio visiting for. I stayed 7 months in Rio, it turned out, and one of the reasons I stayed so long was that Dave and I spent the day together. We made him dinner. With my first wife was born in Brazil, and I was with her parents there in the apartment. Then we went and Dave got ready for work and talked to me about drum ode. And then he brought me to the Miles concert, and I actually got to meet Miles, who was not feeling that well that night. But I did have a moment where through Dave I met Miles. But even more than that, Dave told me before he left, he told me that the night before, that's right, he had sat in at this place called Le Bateau, and he'd found a nice little band there, which was led by a guy named Johnny Alf, and there was another guy named Lucio Alves, who were both kind of Brazilian stars. Johnny Alf, in fact, is considered O Pai de Bossa Nova, the father of Bossa Nova. And Dave said, and I hadn't really I'd come down to Brazil. I'd been there a couple of months, and I'd been woodshedding and practicing, but I hadn't gone out and really sat in with anybody, except I did sit in with a very traditional band one night, playing chorinho and that type of thing. But I hadn't gone out. So I came out when Dave left. He told me to go to this place and sit in. Anyway, I sat in there, and they ended up hiring me. And I stayed for 7 months playing with both of those bands,
Oh,
and
that's
learned so much about Brazilian music. And, I ended up teaching a lot of the Brazilians too down there, really being the first American to come down and actually stay for a while and teach. But, more than that, I ended up working. It was a great gig, 6 nights a week. I think it was 5 nights a week for the next 6 months I worked there.
nice.
And that was all because Dave sat in and told me about it. He said, man, if you want to play, these guys play pretty well, and they really understand the Brazilian stuff, and you might have some fun. So I did that. So thank you.
Yeah.
You're,
Yeah.
you're welcome, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing is, that's a great thing, is that we've been in the industry together, but in many times different capacities. It all kind of just complemented, like it was all music, but it was different areas. So, and being able to understand that whole thing, both of us. So I think
I
that
think
was plus.
that's wonderful. It's 30 something years now, right?
We'll be 37 in November. We were married in 1986.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
And we're going to hear some of Dave's music. And I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to this podcast. And thank you, Karis, again. And thank you, Dave Liebman. We're so happy to have been able to do this. I had a wonderful time and really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Bro.
Thank you, Bob. It's nice to see you. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you both, too. So I guess, Jesse, I also want to thank Jesse Kaiser for putting all these technical things together. And I'd like to remind you that this is part of On the Real Side is a podcast affiliated with what I call Bob Mover Jazz Ability. And we do podcasts, we do master classes once a month, usually on the first Saturday afternoon of each month. I give a master class. And if you're interested in that, you can tune in to bobmoverjazzability.com and get all the information which is there. And at this point, we'll play some of Dave's music. I don't know where Jesse is.
Well, what I would suggest is just since I have so much music out there, that you should go into a playlist and something. You pick it. You choose some tracks.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Jesse.
Is it live now, though, David? I think it's live now.
Hi, Jesse. So we're going to finish up Did you hear? You heard the last part,
Yeah,
and
app to Apple, whatever, Spotify. I don't know. I don't. We don't do it, but we know about it.
so we'll find something to play, and we'll insert it here. For those with a live podcast, just it's easy enough to find Dave's music. One thing about Dave Liebman, he's never been in hiding, and
Wanted.
wanted. He's been wanted, but not in hiding. Um, so I think that. Oh, by the way, one thing about your mouthpiece and your setup on alto, on soprano and tenor, just for the saxophone players out there, I'm somebody who sticks with mouthpieces for a long time. Generally, if I like something, I stay with it. Have you been with the same setup for a long time, or have you been experimental in that respect?
I've definitely been with one. It's this guy whose name is LaBelle. You might know his name, Frederick LaBelle, and he made a great soprano mouthpiece for me, which I use. But the reed is Tom Alexander's reeds, and tenor. Although I'm not playing tenor now, tenor is Tom made a mouthpiece for me. Tenor, though I'm not playing tenor now, just playing soprano.
So you've been exclusively playing soprano. I remember a number of years ago you did that, but then you kind of brought the tenor out again when you had that 3 tenor thing with Michael and Lovano.
Well, I needed a break from having to have 3 instruments. I had the flute too. Just
Right.
it's just like overkill, and what would it be like if I just delved into one of these ones? And that's why I chose soprano for a variety of reasons, and that stayed with me. And I don't know, but the way things are these days, I'll probably stay there for a while. Soprano.
Well, anyway, thank you very much, and I guess we'll call it a day here. And once again, thanks, Mr. Dave Liebman, my buddy, and hope you all enjoyed it. We sure
Thank you.
did. Bye bye, and thank you, Karis, again.
Ciao.
Okay, that's it.
I'm leaving now.
Do we have to turn something off or something?
Just